if your spouse is outside of the US, it could take a really long time, especially if they are from one of the 75 countries that is not currently issuing immigrant visas. So Trump issued 3 separate executive orders. The totality of the 3 effectively limits legal immigration to the United States from 75 countries around the world. And this has dramatically reduced the flow of legal immigration. So for all of you people out there who thought that Trump only wants to deport criminals, not true at all. He wants to slow down all legal immigration. And personally, this is not why you're watching this video, but personally, I don't even think it's Trump. It's just like Stephen Miller using it as a way, and Trump's okay with it because it helps consolidate his power. Let's talk about the timeline for a marriage-based green card process. And in this video, I'm gonna discuss adjustment of status in the United States versus consular processing from abroad. We're not gonna discuss fiancé visas in this video. That'll be a topic for a different video. Let's talk about the timeline for a marriage-based green card process. In this video, I'm gonna discuss 2 different scenarios. One is where the immigrant spouse who's trying to apply for a green card is in the US and entered the US legally, usually with some sort of visa, like a tourist visa, or was subsequently paroled. There are a couple exceptions, like a crew member visa. I actually have a couple videos on that. They might not be eligible for adjustment of status. Or if you entered on a fiancé visa a long time ago, and the person who sponsored you, basically your fiance who brought you to the US on that visa, if you end up not marrying that fiance, and then like years later you meet a new US citizen, you get married and you want to apply for a green card, you might also not be eligible. But I feel like the majority of people who entered here on visas entered like on a student visa, a tourist visa, some sort of employment-based visa, and then they subsequently fell out of status, end up marrying a US citizen a while later, could be years, could be decades, and then they eventually come to my office to ask me about the marriage-based green card process, also known as adjustment of status. So right now, this process is super fast, like faster than it's historically been, with the possible exception of Biden, where cases were going just as fast during some parts of his presidency, but were getting approved without an interview, with major benefit for a lot of people during, the last 2 years of his presidency. Right now, you could expect, after you file your I-130, I-485, I-864 package, optionally with a work permit and advance parole, you should expect the interview to probably be within like 4 months. I'm seeing 4 to 5 months pretty much across the board throughout the United States. There are some exceptions, but that's pretty much the timeline that I've been telling people for the last few months. And after you attend your interview, if all goes well, it's quite common for you to receive notification that your I-485 was approved within a week or so, and then to receive the physical green card in the mail like 2 weeks after that. So start to finish, from filing to green card in your hand, could very well be in under 6 months. There are exceptions. Sometimes USCIS issues requests for evidence. Sometimes the interview doesn't go well and there are follow-up interviews and other investigations. This is just a very generalized timeline for what the majority of my clients experience when they apply for adjustment of status from within the US. By the way, guys, this timeline is also pretty consistent across other family-based adjustment of status applications, petitions for parents of US citizens, petitions for children of US citizens who are under 21 and unmarried. These are all referred to as immediate relative category petitions. These are pretty fast right now in the United States. In fact, faster than most of recent history. Now, on the flip side, if your spouse is outside of the US, it could take a really long time, especially if they are from one of the 75 countries that is not currently issuing immigrant visas. So Trump issued 3 separate executive orders. The totality of the 3 effectively limits legal immigration to the United States from 75 countries around the world. And this has dramatically reduced the flow of legal immigration. So for all of you people out there who thought that Trump only wants to deport criminals, not true at all. He wants to slow down all legal immigration. And Personally, this is not why you're watching this video, but personally, I don't even think it's Trump. It's just like Stephen Miller using it as a way, and Trump's okay with it because it helps consolidate his power. But anyway, topic for a different discussion. Legal immigration from outside the US is very difficult right now. But let's say you're coming from a country, your spouse lives in a country that's not subject to the 75 country ban, or your spouse is a dual national and one of their nationalities is not affected by this ban. They can still proceed normally, and this is the timeline that you should generally expect. There's gonna be a 3-step process, and the first step is Form I-130, a petition for your spouse. So the US citizen would file this petition for their immigrant spouse who's residing abroad. It'll take about 12 to 18 months on average for that to get approved. You might be able to shave a few months off by simultaneously filing for a K3 visa by filing Form I-129F. By the way, guys, if this just sounds like gibberish to you, you could also schedule a consultation with us. I could show you how to do it, or we could do it for you if you don't want to deal with this. Eventually, about a year to a year and a half later, that I-130 petition will get approved, and then the case will move on to the National Visa Center. You'll receive an email with case login information. The steps are pretty straightforward from there. The last step can be a little complicated. Sometimes people hire us for that step. Sometimes people hire us to just do the whole thing from start to finish. Depends on how much time you have and how much resources you have available to you. It's a deeply personal decision. Once your case gets to the National Visa Center, you should expect it to be pending there for at least 2 to 3 months before your case becomes documentarily qualified. So the National Visa Center will eventually send you a message internally through their portal that says your documents are now qualified or you're documentarily qualified. The message they send is a little bit different in each case, but that's basically the gist of it. They usually just say this case is now documentarily qualified. From that point forward, your case gets transferred to the consulate. And the consulate is usually in the home country where you're residing. And there, that stage varies greatly based on what country you're living in. Like if you're living in the UK, your interview at the consulate could be 1 to 2 months later. If you're living in Bangladesh, your interview could be 3 years later. It's really crazy how vast of a disparity there is between consulate processing times in different countries. And guess what? The Trump administration has reduced the resources at these consulates, so backlogs seem to be increasing. So in the best case scenario, I tell people for consular processing, you're looking at 1.5 to 2.5 years, and it could be much longer than that. Like 1.5 to 2.5 years assumes that everything remains the way it is right now and processing times don't drastically increase. If your spouse is from one of the 75 affected countries and they don't qualify for one of the limited exceptions to these executive orders, you could be looking at a much longer processing time. The cases will process normally up until the last stage. So the I-130 will process normally, the National Visa Center will process normally, the consulate will mostly process normally. And then when you get to the interview, the very last thing before you get the visa to enter the US to be with your spouse, they'll inform you that your visa is being refused because of this public policy that Trump has announced, and that you should constantly check the government's website to look for updates to this or to see if you're still prevented from entering the United States. What I generally tell people is you shouldn't expect to enter the US if you're from one of these countries and you don't qualify for an exception until the Trump administration ends. That's most likely when these policies will be reversed, unless a court order reverses them before that, which is possible, but difficult. And I'm not gonna speculate as to the likelihood of that happening right now after some recent Supreme Court precedent actually made it much harder for class action lawsuits to affect nationwide policies. One final note that I'm gonna mention before ending this video. Sometimes US citizens have a spouse who's abroad, but who also has a visa to be able to enter the US legally. One thing that you need to be aware of is fraudulent intent. If you misrepresent your intent, so for example, if you have a tourist visa and you're coming here to just visit the US, you have to maintain the intent to visit and depart the United States when you pass through customs. If the customs officer believes that you're coming here to marry your US citizen fiance, soon to be spouse, and you're gonna apply for adjustment of status from within the US, they will not let you in as a tourist. In fact, they could cancel your visa and order you removed and inadmissible for several years based on fraud or misrepresentation, misrepresenting your intent. And that could really mess up the timeline when you were actually entering the US as a tourist to try to speed up the timeline. So it's very important for you to understand the law, especially if you have the option to legally enter the US and not have to wait out the whole 2 years. Speak to an attorney before you do that, because you need to understand the intent to avoid engaging in immigration fraud. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of today's video. This week, all of my videos that I'm posting are gonna be about marriage-based green cards through the consulate process or adjustment of status. If you're interested in learning more, you could always schedule a consultation directly with me. If you don't want a consultation with a lawyer and you just wanna generally stay up to date with all of these changes, be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys next time for another video.